James, stay with us, mate. Emergency services, what's your location?
Mayday, Mayday, we have an injured man requesting immediate medical evac. Over.
A Stingray, direct hit. He's going fast.
We need a chopper now.
He said he was dying.
The world knew him as the crocodile hunter, a man who seemed to stride straight into the jaws of death, wearing sun-faded khaki boots caked with mud and a grip strong enough to hold the tail of a thrashing 12-foot saltwater crocodile. James Bertakis. His name carried the weight of decades spent pushing through mangrove swamps, waist-deep in water so dark you couldn't see your own hands, yet still closing in on predators that could kill in a heartbeat. He had flipped sharks upright to induce tonic immobility, swung a coiled python from one arm to the other, and maneuvered himself inside striking distance of venomous snakes without a tremor in his stance. He didn't just showcase danger, he engaged it head-on, grabbing, holding, releasing every motion sharp and precise for the cameras and the audience who watched with their breath held. Bertakis' bond with the wild was forged in the heat and grit of Queensland, Australia. Born in 1962 to Bob and Lynn Bertakis, pioneers of wildlife conservation, his first sights and sounds weren't nursery mobiles or lullabies, but the splash of crocodiles rolling in the shallows and the dry rattle of a snake's tail shifting under corrugated iron. His father, a seasoned herpetologist, placed a live snake in his small hands before he could even read, teaching him how to keep his grip firm without crushing, how to step back when a head reared up, and how to angle his approach to minimize risk. By the time he turned 9, James was sprinting barefoot across mudflats, leaping onto the backs of juvenile crocodiles under his father's watchful eye. The air would fill with the splash of water, the thud of his body hitting the animal's armored back, and the sharp exhale as he hooked his arms around its neck to control the head. It wasn't play, it was training and timing, leverage and body control. The Queensland Reptile and Fauna Park, founded by his parents, was his home and his proving ground. Wooden enclosures creaked in the heat, the smell of reptile musk hung heavy, and the constant background noise of claws scraping over logs, tails, sliding through water, and the low rumble of warning growls became as familiar to him as his own heartbeat. Here James learned to close the gap between himself and a crocodile in 3 measured steps, to shift his stance to avoid the whip of a tail, and to keep his hands low and ready to clamp down when the moment came. By his 20s, James had taken over the park, rebranding it into the Australia Zoo. Under his leadership, it expanded into an internationally recognized sanctuary. But his reach leapt from the enclosures to millions of living rooms worldwide, when in the mid-1990s, a clip of him knee-deep in swirling river water, restraining a crocodile with explosive precision, reached the desk of a television producer. The Crocodile Hunter premiered in 1996, and the world met the man who closed the gap between human and predator, not with weapons, but with bare hands, and a razor-sharp understanding of animal movement. From there, he crisscrossed continents, crouching in African brush as lions passed close enough for their whiskers to stir the dust, diving into Pacific waters thick with reef sharks and sliding silently into rivers known for their hidden crocodiles. His khaki uniform became as recognizable as his method: get close, stay calm, anticipate movement, and react faster than the strike. His wife, Terry, worked alongside him, steadying ropes, hauling equipment, and backing him when the line between spectacle and survival blurred. His children, Bindi and Robert, appeared in segments, learning to handle animals with the same confident precision. For Bertakis, every expedition was both education and demonstration, showing the precise angle to grip a tail, the way to control a head without injury, the timing to step aside when claws lashed out. But he also carried a lifetime of proof that even mastery had limits. Those limits would be tested in the warm, deceptively calm shallows of the Great Barrier Reef. The day was bright, the sea a shimmering field of turquoise and white sunspots. The Project Ocean's deadliest had already logged hours of footage with tiger sharks, reef sharks, and other high-profile predators. They were after something unique for the final cut, and when a large bull ray appeared ahead, gliding over the sandy seabed, its wingtips flexing with each stroke, James recognized the opportunity instantly. Bull rays can reach disc widths of over 8 feet and carry hundreds of pounds of muscle in their flat, sleek bodies. They are built to hug the ocean floor, crushing shellfish and small fish with powerful jaws hidden beneath them. While typically docile, their tails hold a weapon, a serrated venomous barb anchored in muscle, and edged like a blade ready to whip forward in an instant if the animal feels cornered. The cameraman positioned himself above, tracking the ray's smooth progress. James entered the water, fins slicing gently to avoid stirring the sand. He kept his body low and behind the ray, moving in a shallow arc, designed to keep him out of its line of defense. For long seconds, the ray continued unhurried, its body casting a shadow on the pale sand. Then, without a sound, the tail snapped upward. The water blurred with movement. The barb drove forward once, then again, in rapid piston-like strikes. James twisted sideways, but the confined space and suddenness left no margin. One strike landed square in his chest, the impact sharp and jarring, a solid bone-vibrating blow. Another strike followed, then another, each one a whip-fast blur, the tail retracting and lashing again with terrifying speed. The water churned, scattering sand in clouds that obscured the view, every strike sending a muffled thunk through the water. The cameraman's view shook violently as he kicked forward. The ray, its body heaving with each tail lash, veered away and vanished into the haze. James, still upright for a heartbeat, exhaled hard and sank toward the bottom. The silence was immediate, broken only by the hiss of escaping bubbles and the muffled shouts filtering down from the surface. Hands closed under his arms, hauling him upwards through the murky water toward the tender. On deck, crew members dropped cameras and rushed to position, one pressing down hard on his chest, another tearing open the first aid kit. CPR began instantly, compressions driving deep water spraying from his lips. "Call it in," someone barked toward the radio. "Chopper now," static crackled. The reply came clipped, "Urgent copy." "What's the nature of the injury?" The answer was grim and loud over the rush of wind and waves. "Stingray. Direct hit to the chest. He's going fast." The crew worked without pause, their hands moving. In a blur, compressions, breath shifting position, checking for pulse. Blood spread dark across the deck, mixing with seawater running in thin rivulets toward the scuppers. The sea around them moments ago, a field of sunlit turquoise, seemed suddenly colder, heavier, as the reality of what had just happened settled over the vessel. The bull ray ahead moved with an unhurried rhythm, its broad body flexing in slow waves, each motion lifting and dropping the edges of its disc. It had shown no tail flicks, no shifts to suggest irritation. For a man like James Bertakis, this was the ideal setup and approach from behind, letting the animal drift forward, the camera capturing a clean, natural retreat. Justin Lyons adjusted his position, keeping the lens locked steady, the housing glinting faintly in the filtered sunlight. They had executed this maneuver with other marine animals countless times, staying just far enough to avoid contact, keeping their fin strokes shallow to prevent stirring the sand. In the wild, though, there is no rehearsal, only the instant reaction of two living beings sharing the same patch of water. No reports, no prior warnings, no file of incidents to learn from. Just the unpredictable physics of proximity and timing. This morning, those variables would align in the worst possible way. Bat Reef spread out beneath a flawless blue sky, the sea a translucent sheet over a living city of coral. Fish swarmed in silver shoals, parrotfish grazed along reef edges, and shafts of sunlight cut deep enough to turn the sandy flats pale gold. The Croc One drifted, nearby crew members moving in quiet preparation, one checking oxygen tanks, another, coiling lines on the deck, all in sync from years of fieldwork. Bertakis and Lyons waded into chest-deep water, the steady push and pull of the tide, rocking their bodies slightly as they scanned for movement. Then they saw a bull ray close to 8 feet across, settled in a shallow depression, its form softened by a dusting of sand. Its eyes faced forward, mouth working slowly against the seabed. The cameraman positioned himself to frame the glide they expected. Bertakis adjusted his course, lowering his profile, closing the last few yards with slow, deliberate kicks. The water was calm, the stage was set. In another moment, the plan would unravel in a burst of speed and force that no one saw coming. The stillness fractured in less than a second. The bull ray's tail, thick at the base and tapering to a whip-like length, arched sharply upward. The motion was explosive, driving through the water with a suddenness that sent a fine spray of sand into suspension. Before Bertakis could change position, the tail snapped forward in a brutal piston-like motion, the serrated barbs slicing past in a blur. One strike landed, then another, each blow fast enough to blur into the next. The tail's movement was tight and rapid, like the lever of a machine driven at full speed. Lyons' camera still tracked the motion for the first heartbeat, recording the pale underside of the ray and the violent arcs of the tail before the scene disintegrated into chaos. The strikes came in a barrage, not the single lash most divers expect from a startled ray, but a relentless flurry, each forward snap powered by the heavy muscles in the base of the tail. Water churned between man and animal, a rolling mixture of sand, silt, and sudden clouds of blood. The barb's backward-facing serrations cut deeper with each withdrawal, each time dragging a new ribbon of red into the water. Then came the single catastrophic hit. The barb, nearly 10 inches of rigid, razor-edge bone, drove straight into Bertakis' chest. The impact carried the dense resistance of bone meeting hardened cartilage, a sharp, jarring shock that pushed past ribs and into the heart. The surrounding water turned darker and the crimson expanding outward in a thick bloom that pushed toward the surface in heavy rolling tendrils. Bertakis' body recoiled once, arms pulling inward instinctively. He broke the surface in the next instant, gasping. Lyons, breaking from his filming stance, lunged forward, shoving the camera aside and wrapping an arm under Bertakis' shoulder. He kicked hard, dragging both of them toward the inflatable tender. The movement left a trail of red behind them, a vivid line in the clear water, marking every stroke toward the boat. Hands reached down from the tender, locking around forearms and hauling them up over the gunwale. Bertakis landed hard on the deck, the wet slap of his body against the rubber floor, punctuated by the sound of the outboard roaring to life. The deck of the tender shifted underfoot as the driver shoved the throttle forward, the bow lifting and slamming against the chop. Lyons dropped to his knees beside Bertakis, water streaming off both of them, and immediately began compressions, heel of one hand locked over the other, driving into the center of the chest in a steady rhythm. Each push forced blood up and out through the wound, adding fresh streaks to the already darkening wetsuit. "Get us to Croc 1 now," a crewman barked, bracing himself against the gunwale as the tender surged ahead. Another crew member ripped open the waterproof first aid kit, pulling out gauze and pressing it hard against the injury, his fingers already slick. Lyons leaned in for breaths between compressions, sealing his mouth over Bertakis's and forcing air in before snapping back to pump the chest again. A third man grabbed the radio mic, pressing it tight to his mouth against the wind. "He's bleeding out. We need a chopper now." The reply cracked back through the static. "Copy that. Croc 1. Nature of injury." The voice answering was harsh and loud over the engine noise. Stingray barbed to the chest. "Direct hit. He's going down fast." Spray from the bow wave blew across the deck, mixing with the mist of sweat and blood. Bertakis' lips were already shading toward blue. Lyons kept the count in his head, never pausing, his arms locking and unlocking with mechanical precision. The man holding the gauze shifted closer, trying to keep pressure, even as the boat's movement jostled them from side to side. Ahead, the white hull of the Croc 1 grew larger. Crew members were already gathered at the rail, hands gripping ropes, eyes fixed on the small boat racing toward them. The tender swung in hard alongside the bow, bumping against the larger vessel. Lines were thrown, caught, tied off in seconds. "Lift," someone shouted. Two men leaned over, locking their grip on Bertakis' arms, while Lyons and another man lifted from below. The weight came up over the gunwale boots, scraping on the metal until they had him flat on the deck of the main vessel. Oxygen gear appeared, a mask pressed over his face, the hiss of airflow mixing with shouted coordinates into the radio. The instant Bertakis was laid out on the main deck, the crew split into two teams without hesitation. One kept CPR going, the compressions driving into his chest in sharp, even bursts, the sound of palms striking wet neoprene echoing off the metal bulkheads. The other team moved around them, pulling the oxygen tank closer, unspooling the green hose fitting the mask tightly over his mouth and nose. The hiss of air pushed into him between compressions was steady but urgent. The radio operator stood near the bow with the handset pressed so hard to his ear it left an imprint. Marine incident, multiple barb strikes, possible cardiac arrest. Bat Reef location, get a medevac chopper here immediately. His voice cracked slightly before he repeated the call, in shorter, clipped bursts, the urgency making each word punch through the static. From the far side of the deck, someone grabbed the emergency medical kit. A bright orange case flipped the latches and tossed out its contents in a controlled scatter. Trauma shears, IV bags, rolls of dressing. Blood pooled beneath the wound site, slipping through the deck drains and disappearing into the wake behind the vessel. The air smelled of salt fuel and the faint metallic tang of blood. "Pulse," one crew member asked over the rotor roar beginning to build in the distance. "Weak. Almost gone." The man on compressions didn't slow, arms locked, elbows snapping straight with each downward drive. Another knelt at Bertakis' side, holding the mask in place with one hand while lifting his chin with the other, ensuring the airway stayed open. The call came from the radio rescue helicopter inbound from Cairns ETA minutes. Eyes turned toward the horizon, but no one broke rhythm. The team had drilled for snake bites, crocodile lacerations, shark punctures, but this was different. The barb had gone straight into the heart. They knew it. They could feel it in the lack of resistance under their hands, the way the blood kept coming, no matter how hard they pressed. The thump of the rotors grew louder, vibrating through the deck plates. Still, they worked, shouting vitals, changing positions, swapping hands to keep the compression strong. The thump of the helicopter's rotors grew from a distant pulse to a heavy rhythmic pounding in the air. Crew members shielded their eyes against the spray and wind as the chopper swung into position above the reef, the downdraft flattening the water's surface into ripples radiating outward. The rescue medic leaned out the open side door, scanning the deck layout. On the Croc 1, the team kept moving. The man doing compressions called for a rotation, swapping out with another pair of fresh arms to keep the pressure consistent. The oxygen mask hissed between each set of 30 pushes, the count steady, even as the rotors roared overhead. Blood continued to seep from the wound in a slow, unstoppable spread, the deck crew working around it without hesitation. Lowering basket, the medic's voice cut through the noise. The winch cable unspooled with a metallic whine, the stretcher basket swaying slightly in the wind. 2 crew members grabbed the guidelines, hauling it in as soon as it touched the deck. Bertakis was transferred in, second straps cinched tight across chest, hips, and legs. His head was secured to the oxygen mask still in place, while one of the medics climbed into the basket with him. "Vitals," shouted the medic already on deck. "None we can read," came the reply, flat and immediate. The basket lifted, swinging slightly as the winch drew it back toward the helicopter. The medic kept a hand braced against the frame, one knee pressed to the stretcher's side as they ascended. Within moments, the load was inside the chopper. The winch line snapped free, the door slid closed, and the helicopter banked hard toward the mainland. On the deck below, the crew of the Croc 1 stood in the rotor wash, watching until the shape of the aircraft shrank into the bright blue distance. Inside the helicopter, the medics worked in silence, but with urgency. One kept compressions going on the narrow floor space, while another prepared a cardiac monitor. The flat, unwavering tone that followed confirmed what they already knew: the heart had stopped entirely. They recorded the time approximately 11:30 a.m. By the time the helicopter touched down, the report was already transmitting through official channels: wildlife presenter fatally injured at Bat Reef. On the Croc 1, the atmosphere shifted into a stunned quiet. Crew members moved with mechanical precision to stow gear, rinse blood from the deck, and secure the tender. Not one word was raised above a murmur. The reef around them carried on, schools of fish drifting past, seabirds riding thermals above the water. The stillness felt at odds with the reality on board. The man who had wrestled crocodiles in front of millions, who had navigated encounters with some of the most dangerous animals on the planet, had been taken in minutes by a single defensive strike from a creature that most divers passed without a second glance. When the official confirmation came back to the Croc 1, it was just a few words over the radio, but they landed like a weight. The crew stood still, some with hands braced against the rails, eyes fixed on the water. The rescue had been as fast as humanly possible. The outcome had been beyond their control from the moment the barb struck. The first headlines hit before the Croc 1 was even back in port. In newsrooms across Australia, producers interrupted scheduled programming with a scrolling red banner. "Breaking news: James Bertakis dead at 44. Anchor desks shuffled scripts aside, listening to the incoming feeds from Cairns and Port Douglas. Within minutes, the international wires carried it across time zones: wildlife icon killed by Stingray. In Los Angeles, a morning show paused mid-interview as the producer held up a hastily printed bulletin. In London, newsroom phones lit up with calls from Australian correspondents. The phrasing was nearly identical everywhere. The man who had held crocodiles, sharks, and venomous snakes barehanded was dead after an encounter with a creature most considered harmless. Cable networks cut together footage from his decades of work: James knee-deep in muddy rivers, his hands locked around the jaws of a thrashing saltwater crocodile, swimming alongside great whites, lifting a spitting cobra with a measured, steady grip. Now those same networks pair those images with maps of the Great Barrier Reef, an arrow pointing to Bat Reef. In the hours that followed, journalists scrambled for quotes from crew members, marine biologists, and government officials. Spokespeople for Queensland's emergency services confirmed the details struck in the chest by a Stingray's barbed medevac attempted pronounced dead upon arrival. The medical examiner's early statement echoed across the airwaves massive trauma to the heart. In Australia, the reaction was immediate and visceral. Outside the Australia Zoo, a line of cars formed by mid-afternoon. Visitors, many wearing khaki shirts in his signature style, walked to the front gates carrying flowers, handwritten letters, and stuffed animals. By evening, the fence was draped in tributes, paper signs painted with crocodiles and stingrays. Notes thanking him for teaching them to love animals. Photographs of families meeting him at the zoo. The Prime Minister addressed the nation, calling Bertakis a wonderful character and a true Australian, his voice solemn. Flags across the country dropped to half-mast. In Queensland, the local radio stations suspended music programming, playing hours of archived interviews and field recordings from his expeditions. Internationally, the tributes were just as heavy. In the United States, where the crocodile hunter had been a staple for years, major networks ran back-to-back retrospectives. Messages poured in from fellow conservationist actors, athletes, some recalling shared adventures, others speaking simply as fans who had grown up watching his shows. At the zoo, the staff kept working, tending to the animals James had cared for, while quietly guiding visitors who had come only to pay their respects. The air was heavy with the mixed scent of flowers and the earthy musk of the reptile enclosures. Cameras from every major network lined the entrance, capturing the steady flow of mourners. In the days that followed, requests poured in from every corner of the media world for the raw footage of the incident. Networks offered large sums. Producers pitched tributes, documentaries, and specials that would contextualize the final moments. The answer from the Bertakis family was immediate and absolute no. The recording would never be shown. It was a unanimous choice. Terry Bertakis, the children, and Justin Lyons all agreed that the images of James's death would remain locked away. Lyons, who had been behind the camera that morning, gave measured interviews instead, recounting only what was necessary: the strike, the wound, the attempt to save him. In the last 4 words James spoke, there was no dramatization, no embellishment, only the stark facts as he had seen them unfold. Public reaction to the decision was overwhelmingly respectful. Fans understood that James's legacy was built on his life's work, not the moment it ended. The footage became something almost mythical, known to exist, but unseen, protected from the pull of morbid curiosity. Terry stepped forward into the spotlight just days after the funeral, her composure steady. She thanked the public for the flood of letters, flowers, and support, and she spoke of James's mission as if it were still in motion. She vowed that the Australia Zoo would continue to expand conservation programs, that wildlife warriors worldwide would remain an active force in protecting endangered and injured species. Visitors to the zoo doubled in the weeks after his death. Donations to wildlife warriors surged, each note often carrying a short message about how James had inspired someone to care about animals they once feared. Staff worked longer hours to manage the crowds, but there was a shared sense of purpose. Each person knew they were keeping his mission alive. Months later, documentaries began airing around the world, not of the accident, but of the decades leading to it. Footage showed a young James Bertakis learning to handle snakes from his father, diving with sharks and hauling crocodiles from riverbanks. Interviews with friends, colleagues, and conservationists painted a portrait of a man who had lived without hesitation in pursuit of a single goal: connecting people to the wild. His signature khaki shirts became symbols of environmental advocacy. Schools used his shows as teaching material. Zoos and wildlife parks dedicated exhibits in his honor. In conservation circles, his name was invoked alongside the programs and species he had fought to protect. There were no campaigns to end all human interaction with dangerous wildlife. Instead, his death was seen as a reminder of the respect such encounters demanded. Conferences and training programs began incorporating the incident into safety briefings, not as a deterrent from the work, but as a clear example of nature's unpredictability. His final words, "I'm dying, mate," became part of the conservation community's collective memory, not in a sensational way, but as a testament to the reality that no amount of experience removes the risks of working in the wild. Those words were repeated quietly at memorials, in classrooms, and ranger stations, often followed by a pause heavy with understanding. In the end, the reef where he fell returned to its quiet state. The bull race swam on, unaware of the role it had played in a global loss. The sun still lit the corals in shifting patterns, the tides still rolled across the flats, and the wild remained exactly what it had always been: untamed, indifferent, and magnificent. For those who had known James personally, the silence he left behind was profound. For the millions who had known him only through a screen, the loss was just as sharp. Yet his legacy did not end in the shallows of Bat Reef. It lived in the hands of every child holding a snake for the first time, in the eyes of every visitor, watching a crocodile surface, in every act of care for an animal on the edge of survival. The wild had claimed him, but it had also been his greatest gift to the world. And in that, his presence endures, not as a man who conquered nature, but as one who met it face to face again and again and brought the rest of us along for the journey. James Bertakis' story is a reminder that the wild will always have the final word. His life's work still inspires millions to protect and respect the creatures that share our planet. If his journey moved, you help keep that mission alive. Share his story, subscribe for more powerful true wildlife tales, and join us in honoring his legacy by protecting the wild he loved.